Welcome to the Strategy Investment Podcast with Brett Warner. Brett is a successful entrepreneur and investor, and he and his team have sold over $1 billion in real estate. And this is a show about those very topics: investing, real estate, and overall family finance. Hey, my name is Jason, and I'm your co-host. I'm here along with you to answer questions and ask questions and just try and learn as much as possible. Hey, and whether you're listening on the podcast or watching it on YouTube, thanks for being here. And today we're talking about how to buy an investment property in the coming year. Now, Brett, it is so good to be here with you, kicking off this podcast. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here today, and I'm pretty excited about this new experience, new learning, and just good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you and I have been talking about this podcast for quite some time.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about your heart and the why of this whole thing.
Okay. Well, you know, I've been doing this for two decades now, and I love learning. I love, just spicing things up. I've gone from residential real estate to commercial to land to even restaurants. And each one of those were, a year or two learning in there. And as you go through and you make relationships. Well, here I am with an opportunity, with a new relationship, you, Jason. And that would be to learn and see if I can do this podcast. So one reason I'm looking at this podcast is I've been told by many of clients over and over, hey, you need to do this podcast. And I thought to myself, oh gosh, how am I going to do something like that? Well, I come along with a friend like you, and here we have an opportunity. People told me to write a book, and I said, oh, that ain't going to ever happen.
Yeah, that's a long process.
We'll see. And so I just love to share my experiences. I love to try to take those experiences and allow people to find, financial freedom, buy back their time in the week, and be able to choose what they're doing rather than be locked down to sometimes what the society puts on us as families.
Right, absolutely. Well, I'm super excited to be here. I've learned so much from you already, and to be able to share that is, it's just a great opportunity. So the format of the show for our listeners is typically going to be, we're just really out there asking questions on these topics, questions from our friends, from our families, from clients, from questions that we get online. And again, today's topic is how to buy an investment property in the coming year. And one of the first questions that kind of kept coming up for us is, when is the right time? Now, there's so much going on right now with the economy, with COVID, all kinds of things. And really, there always is. Certainly this time right now, it feels a little unique. But when is the right time? When is the right time to consider an investment property?
An investment property. Well, investment property, real estate, if you're asking real estate, it's yesterday. And generally, if you're asking, like, when should I get my first home? When should I get out of renting? Or, and we'll get into that in the future shows. But I really think that...
Now, when you say yesterday, okay.
Yes.
I mean, that's behind us, right? Have people missed the opportunity? Is that what are you saying, hey, actually the time has passed, I would wait? Or?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that, too many people don't own their what they have. They'll rent it, or even today you'll see businesses they're turning the models around. They used to sell you the product, now they're leasing you the product. By leasing you the product, they're going to get a lot more money. Well, with real estate, it's the same thing. If you own the property and the appreciation of that property, you'll set all your costs. So if you bought a house in 1990, for example, your payment might have been $700 a month. If you bought one in 2000, your payment would be $1,400 a month. It continues to go on, and people talk about great.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when you say yesterday, you're really saying as soon as possible, because of that value, because of the equity that you're building in your property.
Correct.
Now, one of the things that the first home that I bought was actually a duplex. So my thought was, hey, I'll live in one side of it and rent the other side out, and that'll help, with the mortgage on the place. Do you recommend that? Was I foolish to do that? I mean, I know I've told you some of the stories about tenants and the learnings and challenges that come along, but is that a good idea, or is your first investment property, from what you're saying, your first home?
Well, there's a liability property is your home, And so what you did was you took a house and you duplex, and you made half of it a liability and half of it a rental. And if you have a great marriage, I guess that it works well. But it does bring good domestic problems in by your neighbor and them coming over, knocking on the door, asking you to fix their heat and all these other things. When you asked for investment, and I went back to buy your first house, investment is about having enough, learning how to save first, learning to have a little bit off to the side so that you can prove to yourself when you got that opportunity. Usually it's like a duplex, it might be 10% down, could be 5%. And those are the kind of things that you might turn around and you can make that. You basically, once you get 10%, but you can't save 10%. It's going to be very difficult to buy a house. I can still find ways to do it, and that might be what you said. So if you don't have 10%, then you might take that duplex and you get in owner-occupied 3% down. Now we're looking at a different strategy. We're looking at, okay, how do I get into this property for cheaper? And the other way is I'm going to be an investor now. And I always tell people, if you're an investor, well, you got to put 10 or 25% down. And then I said, what do you mean? I said, I heard about, using other people's money. I'm like, well, have you ever heard about math? And if you go 0 down, 0 times anything is 0. And so what I'll see often is people go, well, I'm going to get in for absolutely nothing. And I'm like, well, you're not an investor then. But when you're buying your own house, now you're getting an asset that's a liability, because if you're living in there and you lose your job, you still owe your mortgage. Where if I have a rental property, one thing that's nice about like a single family in a duplex, this I think is one of our questions, but a duplex is you'll never be 100% vacant usually. Where if you have a single residential home, you could find yourself 100% vacant, and that could be a big difference in your margin on what you got to owe that month. So that's why you want to learn how to save in the beginning. And so I'd love to tell everybody, let's start tomorrow. But that's why we had so many people go bankrupt back in 2010 and 11. And nobody had savings, and they were given reverse mortgages and things.
Right. Now, okay, so one of the things that you said there is percentages down. And I think that's probably one of the most common questions that we got is, how much do I need to save? How much do I need to prepare and to feel like, okay, I'm ready, it's time to invest in a property or something new? What is that percentage? When is that time?
Well, generally you could either take your first property, your home you own. So we'll talk your liability property. There's sometimes people have equity in there. Sometimes you have a rich uncle. Sometimes you have, generally, you would really want to talk to your banker and in the area. There's different banks. There's brokerages. There's brokers that go out and shop the market, and they'll go and they have many different banks. And then there's a local bank, your local community bank. They're going to have a little higher rates, but there you're going to have a relationship. And so they're going to look at your portfolio, and they used to not look at the global, but now they look at your whole picture. And so when they're looking at the whole picture, they decide whether you're going to have to put down 10%, 15, or 25. I'll tell you, generally, you're going to be at 25% if you're over 4 or 5 units plus. And if you're going to 4 units or less, I think a bank would like 20%, but I think you can find lenders with the competition out there today and in the past, and there's times you haven't been able to for 10%, even 5%. But I would not suggest somebody, unless you're getting your own home,
right?
You probably should invest a little bit of your own money into it, even if it's just 5%, because we might be able to find a great deal. And so often it's buying right too, and it's finding that right price.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the right price is always part of the equation, isn't it? So one of the other questions that, and it touches on, how much should I have saved, and I think what you're saying is it's really you're going to need a certain percentage depending on how many units there are.
Correct.
What finance you can get.
And that's why I mentioned the rich uncle. Because, if you got a rich uncle, you can do it next week. But actually you can't do it next week because you need to get the gift from your rich uncle, let it sit in your bank account. It needs to season. And it needs to season for 60 or 90 days. So the bank's not questioning where this money is, and they will actually ask you maybe where it came from, and then they'll actually make the uncle write a letter saying he's not expecting repayment.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So they'll get my uncle involved then as well.
If they see like $75,000 just enter your account 3 months ago and they're looking and they find it, yeah.
Right. Okay.
They would be like, hey, where'd that money come from?
Yeah.
And they want to make sure you don't have debt out there. That's because this is what the people did in 2009. They had lines of credits and
yeah, banks were just giving loans away at that point. Yeah. Really, not hardly even checking.
Yeah, a lot easier than today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, another question that came in and really kind of ranked pretty high was consistent was this idea of an Airbnb versus a long-term tenant. So someone's ready to invest in a property. They invest in a property. Do they take the long-term tenant? I sign a lease for a year or more, or is it a better strategy to go? Oh no, I'm gonna set it up as an Airbnb and to potentially turn tenants over, and is there more value there? Now I know you have owned both. You've done both.
Yes.
So talk about that. Maybe even your very experience between actually being able to compare the two.
Yeah. It kind of depends on the person. It depends on where you are at life. It depends on how much you want to be involved. They do have different ways to do Airbnbs. They have management companies. They'll take 20% or so to take in the cleaners and do everything for you. But 20% is a large part, especially if you're running, 5 days vacancy out of the 30, and then that gives you another 25% or 20% vacancy there, and so now you're running at 40%. So they go, oh, look at it, you can make $1,500 a month. But if you go in December in 3 months, 3 weeks without anybody, so it kind of depends on your area.
Right.
If I was probably in an area like, let's just say Seaside, Oregon, or San Diego, even certain areas of Seattle, you certainly can probably have a lot more people that come visit your Airbnb. Airbnb, I think, is more of an experience. It's more of like telling people, hey, people are enjoying with that which I own. I say to people, when I own an Airbnb, it's fun because I can watch people. It's like they act like they're in Hawaii when they're at my house. I'm like, my golly, they're out there taking pictures, and the kids are doing all this stuff, and that's just wonderful. They can do that on my property, and I can then bless them with that blessing that they can go and say, we're coming back next year. This is the best trip we've ever had. Our family loves it. That's fun.
And I might just say for the listeners that the property that I know of that you have as an Airbnb sits on the water, kind of comes out into a spit, and so it is kind of that destination, so to speak. That location matters so much, is what I hear you saying.
Yes. Yeah. It's not just one that you're coming to visit the kids and you're going to be in the middle of the city and you're just on a city block. Not that that's bad, because those ones rent out too. They're just going to rent out for a little less. They're probably not going to be taking out pictures on 8th Street.
Right.
Because there's people that come and visit people, like we have a shipyard in the area, and there's people that come and visit their family, and they just want a really cheap one. But the people come to ours, and they know they can get more people in the room, and then what they'll do is they'll have the whole family meet. And rather than go to the kid's small apartment, they all come, and the family comes up from, Texas, and another one comes in from Seattle, and another one comes from the base.
Right.
They have a great weekend. Where if I have a landlord, let's talk about just a plain rental month to month. Much more boring. It's much easier. It's passively. You can have a property management now manage it for anywhere from 10 to 14%, so it's less, and then you'll negotiate those costs, but really nobody really enjoys a property. It's almost like you own them.
Right.
You don't see anybody with a great experience. They're using your property. They're not enjoying your property.
Right.
And I'm not saying that all landlord month to month, but generally I have a property that I'm in the process of selling right now. I owned it for 3-4 years. Maybe I have 2 hours at most in that property.
Right.
So there's not much attachment to the property. It's very distant, and it's just was a situation. That was one that I did for a particular reason, but it's much more distance, but the money is consistent and it's less work. So if you're cleaning your own place because it's next to you, or it's like the garage above the house above your garage, it is a part-time job. I mean, there's things I could give tips over time where it says, hey, this will make it easier, but that would be a whole nother show.
Right.
How do you make it easier?
No, that's great. That's a great comparison. And I might just say for our listeners, we're located in the greater Seattle area. So you're going to hear us, reference the region probably. We're actually west of Seattle, kind of across the Puget Sound in Kitsap County. So that's where we're located. And of course, markets vary and everything. But yeah, the fundamentals are pretty much the same here on this particular topic. So another question that we've got here, Brett, is this: types of property. Now, we talked about multifamily, we talked about single family homes. Just starting out, because that's really kind of the topic that we're talking about. You've got the percentage saved that we talked about. You've kind of considered we just talked about the Airbnb versus long term. Is it a better path to take as far as multifamily, or do you suggest, hey, no, that single family home is going to have more value? Which should someone just start now going like, this is my first property? What should they be looking for?
Well, there could be a lot of answers to that question, but I would probably lean towards, probably multifamily, and that's because of the vacancy rate.
Yeah.
And so if you're not going to be buying your own property, now normally my first answer would be, what's the best deal? Where's the most margin, right? So if I buy a duplex that has $50,000 in it, and I see a single family house that I could resell for $100,000 more, well, that's probably a better deal. But to hold on to it for a long term, the duplex might be better, just bringing in income. And
Gotcha.
then, especially depends on where you are financially, monthly, how tight you are. The tighter you are, the less you can want to have vacancies.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this: what was your first investment property?
Mine was my investment property, cash ROI, where I'm making money.
Yeah.
Because I bought my first property was a piece of land.
Okay.
But that was a long time ago in case I lost my job. Never had a place to go pitch a tent.
Right. You had a spot to pitch a tent.
Yeah, I was like, I'll go set up a plan. I'm going to go out to the ocean, and that lot was cheap, and I'll figure out how I'm going to make it if the world explodes.
You could go fishing from there.
Get
right,
away from the crazy city or something. So, but it never happened. So,
Thank God.
But I still.
But you still have that property because I think I've seen that. Is that the property?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. So I still have that property, but my first one was a duplex. It was a
Okay.
little duplex on Chestnut. Yeah. It was a tiny thing. My wife said, "Oh, nobody's ever going to live in that thing. I don't know. What are you thinking?" And I said to her, "Oh, I'll rent it out." And she said, "No, you won't. Nobody's going to live here." And I had it rented out in 6 days.
Nice. Yeah. Now, okay, so let's follow that for a second. So it was a duplex. Both sides sounds like they were pretty small. Did it take work? I mean, is it elbow grease? I mean, for people out there that are going, okay, first one. I mean, at least listening to you, you're like, hey, be ready to put some work into this thing because that's part of the value. Yes. It sounds like, right?
Yeah, the first 5 at least duplexes and houses I bought. I mean, I was changing out baffles in houses I didn't own because I saw the value in the house. So I was like, bring the septic guy in here if they need it, change out the baffles. And I actually put baffles in a house that I don't even own today because I didn't finish the deal.
Right.
I was up on houses cleaning off moss off roofs that I didn't even. Now today they might have more insurance issues with that, but literally, I was on roofs cleaning off the moss. So that it would get through the appraiser. Because I knew the current owner did not want to clean the roof moss off, otherwise he would have. But I wasn't going to be able to, in my negotiations, have him do that. So I said, can I go out on Sunday? And the next time I'm up there scraping a roof that I don't even own yet. But I knew there was value in the property, and I had a contract that would allow me to then finish that. And so there was times it made sense, and there's other times when I put baffles in a house that I don't own.
That's great. That's
baffle's
okay. So
a
for our
septic
listeners
system.
out there, what is a baffle?
A baffle is just in a septic system. All it is it just divides the.
Good. Okay, so here's another good question that we got pretty consistently is when I'm starting out, when I get involved in my first investment property, do I do that on my own or do I get a realtor? Now you own your own real estate company, so realizing who I'm asking here, but is this something that people can do on their own? Is it something that they should do on their own? Or do you suggest, hey, find a realtor that is, focused on and an expert in multifamily homes and have them help you? What do you think?
I think both.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah,
I'm intrigued.
Because you do have to hire professionals. Even right now, I have some great accountants, but I spent this whole last week learning all the tax laws that could be changing coming January. And I'm listening to. I'm going to classes right now. But I have an accountant, best accountant probably in Washington, and does all sorts of large companies. But I still want to know the questions to ask. So This week I'm spending time listening to a very business-like tax show and clock hour classes, but I don't get the clock hours. I just want to know what's going to change. What am I looking for? And real estate would be the same way. So that's me learning today the change that's happening in this quarter or every 4 years or every 8 years.
Right.
Well, real estate's the same thing. You want to know what you're doing. So, you look at your realtor, then you could miss out on your brother's property that's selling. You can miss out on mom. If I bought every property, my grandma, my family goes back into the east side of Kirkland, kind of Bellevue area stuff. If I bought every house else while I was alive. And I could have, I just didn't know how. But if I knew how to put that together and say, hey, Grandma, what if I give you this, we don't pay those people, and then I will use that for my down payment, and I'll give you the money back in 3 years, I would have houses all throughout Washington. But, I didn't, and so I know that now.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered
And
your
actually, this is a perfect time for, I think, a segment that we've got coming up. And I'm going to look at our producer and say, "Is it okay?" And she gave me the thumbs up here. And the segment is called Origin Story. So to our listeners, of course, anybody that's watched a superhero movie ever knows that there's just a good origin story of where Superman came from, and where what was Spider-Man's backstory. He got bit by a radioactive spider. That was always my favorite one. And I feel like you just talked about kind of where you're from, and I wanted you to tell a little bit of your origin story, because how did you get involved? I mean, obviously we're talking real estate today. Your expertise goes back, like you said, over 20 years. How did you get started? Was this always a passion? How did this thing start? What was your radioactive spider?
Wow. Well, I always tell kids, you go out and you make relationships and you start doing your next job, do the best you can for the person in front of you, and just show up, work hard, best you can, and you just watch it work. For me, I'll just go really back to the origin.
Sure.
I started out in the restaurant business at 12 years old, which was illegal, but nobody really enforced that at that time.
No one was checking.
I was 6 foot tall at 13 years old, so nobody asked me any questions. And they didn't. If you had a Social Security card, you knew you were good. And I did, because my sister was 5 years older and she needed a Social Security card. And so I got one, and so I went and got a job. They hired me, and I learned as a busboy, and then I went to the cook, and then I learned a team concept there. I learned how, if you look out for your cooks and your cooks look out for the busboys, and then I became a waiter within like 4 months at like 14 years old. Went on and learned customer service, not even realizing I was in customer service. It was just making people happy, giving them pie. If they were upset with their steak, I said, hey, you want some pie? Often made things good. And so I just kept helping people. And then I went from there, and I said, I got a dream. And this is where probably that radioactive came in. And I said, I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to be a pilot one day. One day I'm going to fly an airplane. This is probably at the age of, I couldn't have been much more older than 9 or 10. And so by 16, I was flying airplanes. I had my license by 18. I thought I was going to be a commercial pilot. And I went down that road and realized, I don't know if I want to be a pilot about 20. I had I was getting several hundred hours, maybe 400. And I was like, okay, we got to make that call. Am I going into the commercial area? And I did a Y in life. And I said, no, I don't want to be away. I'm not even my wife. I don't even have my kids, but I want to be a dad who's home sometimes. So I decided to become a mechanic, and I got into this mechanic job. I went to school, got my airframe, my power plant, my general license.
Okay.
And I could work on airplanes, and then I could fly planes. So I could work for like Learjet or something. Well, next thing I know, I'm working on the flight line, and I realized I was in the worst place. I was totally in a spot that was not my skill set. I could do it. I could read blueprints.
Now, the flight line, what is the flight line?
Well, the flight line is where basically there were several different areas where I worked. I worked in repair, which was B.F. Goodrich Aerospace, which is out of Everett. And then there was another spot that I worked out of Boeing, and there was a couple things like that. And if that's where you do flight delivery, you work with customers. I worked in the Ling line. We'll get into that story another day, but that was my dark spot and where I really learned a whole lot, and I thought it was one of the worst spots of my life. But then when I was at Boeing, I knew. Because at 18, I would get some videos late at night because I didn't have podcasts, and I would get these papers, and I would try to figure it out, but I had no way to do it. But I knew at 25 or 26 when I was at Boeing, I was just saving my money. And so I had to work there 8 years to save money to make that leap in my later 20s to get into real estate. I knew that you could make money in real estate. I knew and I'll talk about finance and other things and how I discovered that I recognized certain things that I thought a lot of people did already, and I realized, that's not what all adults know. And so I just found myself wanting to own real estate, and I just did not like clocking in the clock every day. I call it a JOB. If you hear me say JOB, I'm just talking about the clock, okay? And so, I think a lot of people are going to love their job. They're going to do, and God bless them for doing that. We need people to do all sorts of things. If your whole life is being on the clock and curing cancer, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing to strive for. Right. At the same time, not everybody's curing cancer. And when I left my aviation, I realized I wasn't going to cure cancer in my life, so I just wanted to make money. And so my whole goal was like, how am I going to make money? So I spent years and years just studying finance, listening to radio topics. I mean, I can go through different names of back in the 90s and, how I learned and who I listened to. And then now I'm just me today. And then, like I said, $1 billion in real estate sales in Kitsap County alone. That's not even going outside the county. It just amazes me. And really, all I wanted to do was help people and buy a duplex.
Right. That's how it all got started.
I never even had a plan to open the company. I didn't come out here and say, I'm going to open a big brokerage. It's just, I needed a job because the bank said, you want to buy another duplex, you got to have a job. Right. And so then I said, well, I'll get a job. And it just kind of fell in place. And we'll probably fill those blanks in as we go through.
Absolutely. That is so cool. So just kind of jumping back in, there's a couple more questions. We got a couple more minutes here. One of the things that was a pretty consistent question was when I'm evaluating a property. Okay, so I think I've found an investment property. What are some of the things that you evaluate? What are the first 3 or 4 things that come to mind when you go, oh, there's one. What makes you say that? And then what things are you evaluating to say, yep, this is a green light, or maybe not?
Gotcha. For me, I think it's, hold on, let me just take a sip here. I think
Yeah, no, absolutely.
For me, I can get into all sorts of stuff. I can get into multipliers. I can get into cap rates. I can say, hey, well, what's the expenses and all this? Well, you need to know expenses, and you need to know the rents. You need to know the taxes. You need to know your utility bills and who's paying them. Are you in the red or the black? See, you add those up. You add up your negatives and you add up your positives. And it really doesn't matter what multiplier I give you, because are you negative or positive? And so, I remember back in 2008, people were coming to my office. This is right before the crash. I'm looking for losses, and I'm looking at them going, you're looking for losses? Yeah, I can handle $100 a month. I buy this building and I'll lose $200 a month, and I just scratch my head.
Yeah.
Because when I was buying them, I was making $300 a door.
Right.
And they're saying, I'll take a
loss. Yeah.
And we're not far from that right now, because everything's always shifting. Rents are shifting with rents and prices, and those things are always kind of going back and forth on each other. The great part is our rents are a lot higher than they were on our last collapse. So it can people say, oh, well, no, the rents are higher, which then you can afford a more expensive property.
And so what you're talking about as far as all the finances, the percentages, the multipliers are really, you're talking about cash flow, right? So when you're talking about, I'll take a loss on a door, you're talking about monthly cash flow. You're saying my expenses are actually more expensive than my income, and then that's a negative cash flow. That's a negative number.
So let me explain why you might want a professional. Okay, so every area or every time, I've been doing this for, like I said, a while now, and I've seen cap rates all over the place. I've seen cap rates at 11, and I've seen them at 8 for a long time.
Okay, now cap rates, right? Our producer's waving at me. I told her, if you use a term and we don't 100% know exactly what it is, we're going to make you explain it to us. Talk about cap rates for just a second for our audience.
I might not be able to give you the exact definition, but it's basically capitalization rate. And so that's your return, which you'll hear me say many, ROI, return on investment. And so essentially it's basically, if I'm at a 10 cap rate, it's going to take you approximately, it's going to take you 10% a year to get your money back. So if I buy a property, it's making $4,000, and I've dumped in, let's just say it's making $2,000 a month, and I dump in $24,000. How long is it going to take me to get my money back?
I got you.
It's really a loose definition.
Yeah.
And I probably want to make sure I dig.
No, that's okay. I think for our listeners, honestly, it's just about the way that you think about those. Certainly, there's a formal definition somewhere out there that anyone can go look up if they want. What I'm trying to get at is the way that you think about things, because I've been out on properties with you, and I see the wheels spinning, and you're a million miles out in front and going how you're evaluating those. So that's great.
And go back to your question, looking at repairs, looking at the roof cost, looking at the age, usually I'm looking at the corners. structural stuff, very expensive stuff. I look up in the attics is very important. Underneath the house is very important.
Right.
A lot of stuff in the middle is the lipstick. And
So, okay, so there's something I'd love to just hang there for just a second. So the middle stuff is lipstick, which you're talking about floors and paint and stuff that is
faucets and
pretty fixtures, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But what you started with there is you started with roof, foundation, and you're looking at, how are those things doing? Now, I know that you've got some construction in your background and you understand those things. For somebody that goes, oh, this looks like a pretty good deal on paper, would you suggest them actually bring in general contractor out or somebody that could really take a look at those things? Or is that done in an inspection? I mean, when do you really evaluate those things that could be deal killers? I mean, because I've heard you talk, look, roof, that's a significant cost. Certainly if you get into foundation, could be massive costs. What do you recommend there?
Well, there's a key there. There's like me who's been doing this for 20 years and seen lots of deals. And so I can walk around a property and see things that, people just don't see. I mean, I have 3 brokers and I'm like, did anybody see the, oil tank over here? And it's like, oh, I didn't see that. And I'm like, you don't see the cap right there? And so
Right.
I would be careful because I've got so much experience. The new person, yes, I would say, they got home inspectors. You can get in a contract. You can hire that home inspector. Once again, the home inspectors, half of them don't know what I know, but they went and took some classes. And so now you're trusting a guy that basically your whole recourse is the cost of your inspection, which I think is smart to do. I think you should have somebody come in that's going to go up in the attic, it's going to go down in the floor, and they're going to give you a good report. The thing is do you really? Sometimes they say, oh, water temperature's 108. And so I'm thinking, 108, So what? I mean, I just paid you $500 to tell me that the water temperature from the hot tank is 108 degrees.
Right.
You want them looking up in the garage. You want
Right.
him. You want them up in the rafters, and that's up in the attic.
Yeah.
And you want them down underneath, looking at the beams, making sure that the dirt's and the wood's not sitting on dirt. Now
Right.
you can do that. I can go do that because I went under with houses and I asked the inspectors. So if I hired an inspector and I was teaching you, Jason, I said, "What are you doing here? Get under there with him and ask him what he's doing, so you don't have to
Right.
pay for him next time."
Right.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
But it's often people are like, "Oh, I'm not going under there. I'm too good for that." I'm like, "Well, I wanted to know what he was doing."
Right.
And then I realized when I learned what he was doing, this is 20 years ago, I realized I knew what a lot of brokers didn't know what their inspectors were doing. I'm like, well, no, he's doing this right now, he's doing that. And I also had the construction background. So I would say you certainly want to hire professionals. And if you want to save yourself $500, which I, as a licensed broker, have to recommend a home inspector. It's against the law for me not to.
Right.
Now, you as a buyer could choose not to, or as a buyer, you could say, well, let me bring my roofer out here and have him look on the underside, not just the top side, but the underside. And I'll bring out my contractor. He's a good foundation guy. I'll go have him look. You just saved yourself $500.
Yeah.
If you don't need to look at the lipstick. And do you want to know that the temperature's,
90
108
right,
and,
degrees, right.
Your flow is, the knob when you push it up. You
Right.
can go turn on the water and see if it leaks at the valve.
Yeah.
But most people are like, I'm going to go pay this guy money. And I'm not saying don't do that.
Right.
But I am just saying that realize. I would say 8 out of 10 times, I come up with, that might be a little much, 6 out of 10 times, something comes up on an inspection. I bring out the professional electrician, I bring out the professional whatever, and they say it's not a problem.
Right.
It's not a problem. And the inspector brings something, and I've told other brokers, I said, hey, they said, oh, I think the fuse box is live. And I said, fuse box now live? Why don't you stick your tongue against it and tell me it's live? Because I knew it. I was touching it. I have the background. I know what it's like.
Right.
I would have a little there'd be a little hiss noise. I mean, it just wasn't live. And
Right.
I was kind of joking with him but I brought my inspector out. I had to pay now an electrician to come,
Right.
king their inspector, which cost me, my seller, $150 to say it's all adequate. Inspector did not know what he was talking about. And I can tell you that happens a lot. But I'd rather have that happen than somebody go blindly into it. I just don't need an
Right.
inspector.
I can do this myself.
I can
if
just
they
do it,
don't-
and
right, yeah.
now let's not do an inspection, and
Yeah.
let's just go forth, unless the price is right.
It actually leads me to the next question, and I think this is a good one to end on. Actually, finding these properties, finding investment properties, because I think when people see something that has a lot of value on it, it's going to be in high demand if it's just listed, for everyone to see. Now, I know there are ways to look at foreclosures and auctions and other options, but for someone just starting out saying, I want to get into real estate and I want to buy my first investment property, where's the best place to find it?
Well, probably the MLS. I'm probably your local MLS.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, and I see a lot of people spend a lot of time going after what might be 5% of the sales out there. We would call that people what we call bird dogs, people that search for properties. They go out and they try to find things. Well, there's very few of them, and you can get them, and there's great deals when you get them. There's also the auction. Auction is great, but I would probably start with the MLS.
Yeah.
And I'd start working, just getting an idea of value, what even just market value is of things. Because once you know market value, then you know whether you're getting a good deal or not. If you know what eggs cost off the top of your head, when you find a certain egg in the neighborhood, you'll know whether it's a good deal or not. But if without watching the normal market, you don't know which is a good deal. And do you want to trust your broker alone, or do you want to know what you're doing? You're the pilot. You're the one who signs your name on the bottom of that contract, not him. You're the one that says you're going to do these inspections, not him.
Right.
But you think that when you hire that broker, and some of them don't tell you, I'm not signing my name. You're signing the name.
Right.
Read the contract.
Right.
Know your timelines. The broker's job is to communicate to you, let you know your timelines, and do this stuff. Now, we can bring in extra, but really, the job of the broker is to communicate the timelines, and you will say that I'm gonna perform. It's called, the contract is you perform, two sides of the contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so there you go. That is a kind of an overview of, if you were considering buying an investment property this next 12 months, that gives you a pretty good idea where to find it, what to consider, and how much to even save before you start to consider it. Thank you so much, Brett. That's awesome. Great overview. One of the things that we do want to do each show is just thank our sponsors. Our main sponsor being the Creative Consortium. It's actually where we're shooting this episode right now. The Creative Consortium is in Paulsbo, Washington, and we thank them for this space and the time. And we will see you next episode.
Thank you.
Hey, listeners, thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Investment Podcast. If you have questions for the show that you'd like to hear us discuss, or just general comments, feel free to pop over to the website at strategyinvestment.net. We would love to hear from you and look forward to seeing you next show.